My tradition is Christian, but I've long since come to see that what Jesus was teaching and what his point wasn't about, come through me and, God will give you a deal when you die. His teaching was learn to forgive even somebody who tortures and kills you. When you can forgive in real time a person who's sticking nails in you and a sword, you've achieved maximal peace and happiness, because even that is no longer able to impact you and who you truly are, and it restores your identity, right, as a true godlike being.
That was my guest this week, James Kimmel, and we are talking forgiveness. Welcome to the Recover Yourself podcast. I'm your host, MartinJon, and here we address topics you'll be facing on a journey to recovering yourself. This podcast is all about expanding how we understand both addiction and recovery. I'm interested in doing this so everyone has an opportunity to recover themselves. This way, no matter where you are on that journey, there is a place for you here. James and I are talking all about those bedfellows, revenge, and forgiveness. One thing I'm excited about in this episode is the research going toward yet another emotion that many of us embrace being shown in the light of addiction. Recovering to ourselves is a journey through a minefield. The more we advance on our journey, the more we see how easily it is to live under the influence of something like an emotion, substance, or even an idea. James is an author, lawyer, researcher, and lecturer at Yale, and has a lot to share about both revenge and forgiveness. So I encourage you to stick around until the end, where James gives us an overview of the forgiveness technique of non-justice. James, thank you so much for joining me, man.
Hey, you're quite welcome. I'm happy to be here.
You had an experience, and I don't want to get into your story too much, of how you got here, but I'll put a link in the description about your experience about revenge, and how revenge kind of was something that really drove you into researching addiction things. Now, how do you see revenge and its relationship to addiction?
The relationship between revenge and addiction is something that you probably, and your listeners and viewers probably have an instinctive awareness of if you begin to think about it, or if you're a person who kind of tends to, when you're wronged or offended or mistreated, you're starting to instantly start to think about, hey, I want that person to be punished for what they did. And, that's a common, of course, purely natural emotion. There's no mental illness connected with that whatsoever. It's part of our brain biology. But here's the thing about it that we've been learning over the last 15 years, or scientists have been learning, right? And what they've been finding is that this desire to retaliate, if you think about it, let's just start with you're wrong, right? Somebody does something to insult you or offend you, you're cut off, driving on the way to work. And all of a sudden, your brain just goes into full, right, retaliation mode. Why, right? It could go into full, I want ice cream mode, or it could go into full, I want to take a nap and wrap myself in a blanket mode. But it doesn't do that, right? It goes into a full-on pitch toward, I need to retaliate or punish that person who wronged me. And this began to fascinate me because my own experiences from a teenager on, being bullied as a teenager and having a really serious encounter with these bullies that led to them killing my dog, and then me going after them ultimately a couple of weeks later after they did another attack at my house, with me going after them with a gun. I didn't do anything with the gun, thank God, but I went after them, and I was driven by the desire for justice. And usually when I'm using the word justice, and we should probably start with some clarity on what that term means, right? Mm-hmm. Justice means two opposite things, and this is hugely dangerous for humanity. When we refer to justice as equity, fairness, peace, even love, right? That's one form of justice. It's the highest form. We consider that a high ideal. We build justice temples that are called courthouses, and we kind of tend to almost worship justice as a god in a secular American society that continues to shift sort of away from religion. A lot of the things that the priests and bishops and and people have done throughout history, whatever your religious tradition might be, a lot of those roles and decisions and morality determinations, and what is sin and what isn't, a lot of that's been shifted in America and Western countries to lawyers and judges, right? Who carry this all out and have their own, like the priests used to have. They always spoke in Latin, and lawyers speak and have spoken traditionally in Latin for their unique terms. And so we've created, right, this secular tradition in America in which we set justice on a pedestal, and we have our priests and prophets and bishops to justice, and those are lawyers and judges and the people in the courthouse, right? So there's a good amount of parallelism there. But that parallelism is great and works when we're thinking about justice as equity, the love side of justice. But we also have this exact, couldn't be more opposite meaning. And the opposite meaning of justice is justice in the form of revenge, retaliation, punishment, and vengeance. Here's the danger. If justice means both things, then when you say, well, let's just go back to President Bush after 9/11. When President Bush came out to the American public and said, we're going to bring the terrorists to justice now. This is it. We've been attacked. We're going to bring the terrorists to justice. He did not mean fairness, equity, and love. He meant we're going to go and kill people, a lot of people. And we did unleash never-ending war that started then and is still going on today, right? Yeah. Decades later. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed on all sides of this. Civilizations have been, and communities, societies have been ruined. We've spent trillions of dollars in this seeking and search for justice. Not justice, equity, justice, revenge. But the thing about it is when you say you're bringing the terrorists to justice, you've sanctified your worst possible behaviors. You sanctified killing. You make it almost, you give it a religious reason for existence. Mm-hmm. And it enables a society or an individual to commit the greatest atrocities you can imagine because you're only doing it in the name of justice. And that is a high elevated name, right? When it's justice in the form of fairness. And so it enables us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. If President Bush had come out and said, look, we're going to go get vengeance, we're seeking revenge, that would be politically and socially unacceptable to many people in society to be that blunt about it. So we use the word justice as a cover for everything from a nasty tweet up through domestic violence, street violence, terrorism, warfare, genocide. All of those things are retaliation-driven actions of humanity, but we call it justice because it enables us to do all of it in the name of some high ideal.
Whatever we want, right? Like we have a blank check. And we do that within ourselves.
Right. Right. So we do it, and I do it at least, and I've now found in my research that many, maybe most. So we do this internally, many of us. And then if you were to really parse it down even further, there's a group of folks who have, let's say, minimal control, hyperwiring, and who will retaliate up through violence. And you would, and studies show, right, that most, we'll just talk about murderers in prisons, most of them are not, the focus of criminologists and television shows and the media tends to be the thought that people who commit murders or multiple murders must be sociopaths or psychopaths, right? They must be wired wrong. And so there's been a lot of research and brain imaging studies on and an ability to diagnose and parse out who is a sociopath or psychopath. But those individuals, and they do have a different brain structure, but they amount to about between 1 and 3 or 4% of a population. It's extremely rare and small to have this at such a level that you would commit acts of violence. So the truth is that most people who are in prison for murder or violent crime, are not sociopaths, they're not psychopaths, they're normal people like you and I who were unable to control their desire to retaliate when they believed that they were victimized. And this is the source of our, this is where our research is focused on the normal people who don't have a diagnosis of anything, but on one day, under the right set of circumstances, perpetrate the most horrific acts that you can imagine. And the question is, why?
Wow. That brings to mind a lot about the idea that as a group, scientists want to put that into a category. But as society, we just lump them all into murderers.
Right. They're the other, right? They're other. And that makes us feel safe and good about ourselves that we're not, at least we're not that, right? We're not that. And that's fair. At least we haven't done that. But the line between the doing that and the not doing that is far thinner than most people realize. There is no, there's no big, thick stone wall between you and a murderer other than the wall at the prison. But how they got there is razor sharp, and it can happen to anybody. And this is why there's this ongoing mystification. It's, how was it that this family down the street, there was this murder-suicide, the father and husband murdered his own kids and his wife. They looked perfectly normal. They were us. Now he's other. How? Why did that happen? Was he a hidden sociopath or psychopath and nobody diagnosed it? Or is there a better answer for that? And I think that we found the better answer for that. And that runs through, strangely and surprisingly and chillingly, through the brain circuitry of addiction. And, that's what your original question was, is so what's the connection between addiction and revenge? What has been discovered is that when you experience a grievance, which is a sense of wrong or injustice or mistreatment, this triggers for you, it triggers inside your brain the same reward circuitry that is triggered by narcotics. So an individual who's addicted has a certain set of experiential triggers, things that will trigger the craving to start. It might be a state of what we call dysphoria, which is to say unhappiness with the world. It might be depression. It might be just seeing a place where you drink or where you take drugs, or somebody who you often drink or take drugs with. But for revenge seeking, the trigger, what we're now learning, seems to be an experience of injustice, victimization, or being wrong. And this triggers not a desire to relieve the pain through intoxication, which is what's going on with alcohol and substance use. It's the desire to relieve the pain through retaliation. That same reward circuitry is being activated in the brain. And these two areas of the brain are called the nucleus accumbens and the dorsal striatum. And they're areas that are known as part of the amygdala reward circuitry in the brain that is kind of considered the go part of the brain. And in the frontal lobe is where your executive control function exists, and that's the stop function. So it's long been studied that for substance addiction, folks who have a substance addiction have a lot of go, very strong, and maybe less strong stop, because the chemicals and the behavior and the constant doing of it is altering the brain structure and its balance. Or they have a vulnerable brain genetically or by social determinants of health, how you were raised, what happened when you first started using, lots of factors, your economic circumstances. If you live in a community where where you're always feeling oppressed, you have little opportunities, you're going to want to look to feel better somehow. And some people will turn to substances. Well, if you live also in a community or an environment where you're always feeling like you're being wronged or oppressed and harmed, victimized, right, or treated unjustly, you're also going to want to look to feel better. And some percentage of that population is going to want to feel better by retaliating against, initially, the sources, the people who wronged you, right? But often you can't get to those people. I mean, if you're really, let's say you're dealing with systemic racism, for instance, your systemic abuse, it's poverty, which is all around. There's not one person that you can retaliate against. So people, it's also been shown, can gratify their need to retaliate by retaliating by proxy, which is to say you can retaliate against an individual or a group or an institution. When we think of conservative and liberal in this entire country, right? You can think about one group is, I now see as perpetrating unfairness and injustice upon me, whichever side you might be on, and I now need to retaliate against them. But it's not a specific person, and it could be somebody who's never done anything to you at all. A simplest example would be coming home from a bad day at work and classically, kicking the dog or punching the wall. You kick the dog's done nothing to you, right? But you kick the dog out of retaliation for the bad things that happen to you during the day to make yourself feel better, even though the dog isn't the boss, for instance, that gave you the bad day, or
nor is kicking it actually going to make you feel better.
Right. Well, yes and no. So here's the interesting thing. You do feel better initially, just like getting high makes you feel better initially, right? It's a short-term good feeling. That's the problem. So people who retaliate, they feel good about it when they do it. And it's whether it's by proxy or the actual individual. If you saw, and I see, for instance, the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, the insurrection there, very retaliatory, right? And if you see the videos of the folks that got deep into the Capitol and kind of achieved their objective, there's a state of bliss on their faces.
They are high. They are
real. They're high. I mean, it's hard to not recognize that as momentary euphoria, right? And that euphoria came from going against every rule, breaking every rule, and making really the entire government, the American population, whoever it is that you're against there, making them pay and making your voice heard, that I've been victimized and I'm coming back and I'm going to hurt you where it hurts. And it's hurting you to watch me ransack the Capitol. And I know it and I'm feeling good about it. Right. The thing is, that's a temporary high, just like any addict of anything, gambling, whatever it is, the different addictive behaviors. You're getting this temporary high, and then you're left, right, with the come down off of that, the painful withdrawal, because now you've actually realized, as all of them have realized, now I'm in a worse place than I was if I had not even shown up in Washington on that day. Right. I'm suffering because of my own retaliatory behavior. Now other people are trying to retaliate against me. That would be, right, the police, the prosecutors, other people in the country. We've now created a cycle. We've amped it up from one level to another. And the cycle of addiction that people who experience substance use disorders experience is also present in retaliation if you become, and it seems there's evidence to show that it does seem like you can become addicted to this cyclical process of victimization, retaliation, making yourself feel better after each moment of victimization, only to then re-experience a new round of victimization, and it just goes on and on. So that's the idea of a behavioral addiction model of revenge, violence, and grievances.
And it should be said that you and I connected because we both produced something around Trump and addiction. Not that we take a side or anything. I think both of us are kind of beyond that a bit, but there is clear evidence of addiction that has just run rampant over the last couple of years to
right. And
engage in
it's on both sides, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's what you're getting at by without any partisan viewpoint at all. If you look at it, I mean, if you could be, like the proverbial alien watching this, right? And not having a dog in the hunt about whether it's Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, Trump or Biden or whatever it is, right? If you're just watching this whole thing, you would be able to see both camps or both sides engaged in the identical behavior of revenge, grievance and revenge seeking. What's particularly scary is now this is being carried on at a nationwide scale, right? So kind of almost half of the population is feeling aggrieved at all times by the other half, and the other half is feeling aggrieved by the other half. So, and social media has created an unprecedented way of infecting millions of people with a common grievance. And President, Trump was very effective at using it this way, so that his grievances he was able to disseminate and infect other people with, so that it became their grievance. And his desire to retaliate, he was able to disseminate and infect, so that it became their desire to retaliate. On the other side, on the more liberal side, same thing. So they're being aggrieved by Trump's actions, and they're spreading their own grievances amongst their population and their own desire to retaliate amongst their population. And that is the core root, right, of any ultimate civil war. If a civil war were to break out now, as it did in the 1800s in this country, it would be 100% the result of grievances unresolved and retaliation unrestrained. That would be the cause of it. And historians for hundreds of years would write about all of this as if it were a mystery, and go and get caught up in what were the grievances, as opposed to just, and this is where our research is focused on this concept. Grievances are infinite. If you believe that you have a grievance, if you believe that you've been treated unjustly, unfairly, or mistreated, that's purely subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder, right? There's no panel of judges in the world that goes, your grievance, that's legitimate. And over here, you, sir, your grievance is illegitimate. We're voting that one as no grievance, so we're erasing it from your brain. Not possible. So since it's all a matter of your own perception, this means that take 300 million brains in the United States and multiply those by the total number of potential thoughts inside all those brains at any moment and across years and decades. That's the total number of potential grievances that can be experienced in our society. I think it's impossible and a fool's errand to try and redress 300 million times infinity number of grievances. What our research has showed is that, okay, if that's not possible, I do want to stop and clarify, that doesn't mean we shouldn't work on them. We need to absolutely make big efforts to reduce systemic injustices, whether they're political, racial, religious, nationality. All of these things are absolutely worth making our society better and should be done. If you can reduce grievances, then you really cut the front end of the process. But knowing that I can have a grievance because I say a word to you today, Martin, or you could, Martin, I could say something to you that you perceive as offensive, and I've disrespected you. And I'm sitting here going, I didn't even know I said something that offended you. Right. But it's real for you, and that's all that matters. As long as it's real for you, you've been treated unjustly, and you could want to retaliate against me. So our research focuses on reducing the infinite to the one, and the one is this revenge circuitry. We believe that we can solve one problem even when we can't solve an infinite number. And what I mean by that is we could use established, existent addiction recovery processes, whether they're medical or community-based, religion and spirituality-based, self-help, whatever they are, pharmaceutical, all of them. Mm-hmm. All of this, there's been, for the last many decades, a huge investment of billions and billions of dollars in addiction recovery. That's all waiting there, ready for us to use and repurpose in order to intervene on the desire for revenge and the revenge addiction, the revenge craving.
Okay, so I want to just kind of give you two stories from my life where all of this really kind of solidified for me. It was, like, again, I have 20 years clean and sober. And so early in those years, a lot of things were coming at me in terms of a lot of this that we're talking about. And my conversation of like this idea of what are we recovering to? What are we moving towards? How are we going to like move into this new space? This is the core of where these stories kind of take place. One, getting cut off. You were talking about getting cut off before. I used to get so mad when people cut me off. I would just get pissed at every time anyone, even if they didn't really cut me off, right? Like if you were to be cut off is a subjective sort of experience. Someone could come in without a blinker, but there's still a car length ahead of you, and you can consider it being cut off. So I realized in my wanting revenge for those people, there was a story in my head. And that story was that they weren't paying attention, right? Everybody that cut me off had the same story. And I realized at some point that, well, that can't be true. There is no possible way that everybody that cuts me off is just not paying attention. Some people may have wanted to cut me off. Some people may just be doing something else. Maybe they accidentally cut me off for whatever reason. But it can't exist that every instance has this one story. And yet my story of wanting revenge had to do with not paying attention. I looked back and eventually realized that story was related to my relationship with my father, and like not paying attention meant something to me, right? And so that is where that story was coming up, and I had problems about not paying attention or being seen as not paying attention. So I was, utilizing that story so I could continue to get revenge, probably on how I felt about like my own paying attention, or my father felt about me, all of these other things. Another story, again, early in my recovery, what I had found was that I would tell myself a story of something that happened over and over and over and over again. And I would just like wrap my mind around how I was mistreated. And that would keep those juices flowing, those anger juices flowing. So I would want to get revenge. I remember like there was a time where I probably still have it. I have a bludgeon because revenge, you never know. And those are, and that's something that I can say now only because I'm like so far from it. Like I can't even imagine me doing that kind of thing today or even thinking that way today. But I realized that telling that story over and over never resolved anything for me. Never stopped anything. Even though in my mind I was like, once I finish the story, I'll be good. I'll understand. But then what would happen at the end of the story is I would start over again. And then I would tell the story again. And then I'd be like, why am I doing this? And eventually I was able to be like, okay, no, there's nothing at the end of telling this story. You can stop. And this helped me kind of deal with both forgiveness and acceptance, because I think those are kind of two different things sometimes, where it's like, this happened to me. And forgiveness is one thing where I kind of feel like there's like, I am going to forgive you no matter what. And then there's like, oh, I accept that happened. And there's no like real forgiveness that needs to happen. It's just like, oh, this thing happened. Forgiveness still puts us in this kind of place of, you wronged me. But acceptance is like, no, you did something and I took it as being wronged.
Sure. Yeah. I think that the story that you're telling or we're telling yourself about, drivers who cut you off, the story I have now that you say that, I first of all, that's really powerful imagery for me. And I think for anybody that's hearing that, and it's useful because, well, two things. One is it illustrates what I was just saying about a grievance or perception of being wronged is completely subjective, right? So that's in your mind, and nobody else outside of your brain is experiencing this, right? That's your story. That story is playing, and if somebody were in a passenger with you, they're not hearing that. They'll never experience that. It's just in your head. The second thing that was important for me was for me to actually see, I also have a story, right? But regardless, it is, I like your imagery of how could it be that every one of these drivers is, it is this self-seeking, to hell with everybody else individual. That's probably not possible. And it doesn't account for the 30 other reasons that somebody could have for making the turn that they did, among them and including never at all imagining that they felt like they cut you off, right? That they didn't even, for them, they weren't doing anything whatsoever. They're just driving along and it's completely, let's say innocent. So I think that's useful as a way of managing those types of revenge cravings, and I think that's useful imagery. And so when I was just describing how we can repurpose, right, addiction recovery techniques for increasing peace and happiness within ourselves and others that have nothing to do with substance use, right? What I think is powerful about what you're saying is that you're suggesting another addiction recovery technique that could be employed and used for revenge recovery, right? Recovering from revenge addiction, and how to, what can we use and what can we do to go about achieving that goal for people, either before they commit a wrong that actually is no longer socially acceptable and ends up in jail. So an act of violence or some other form of crime. Many crimes, even non-violent crimes, can have their root in some form of retaliation. Anyway, so I think that I don't know if that's resonating for you, but and that's why I think that our conversation, you being an addiction recovery mentor and an expert in the field, and the work that we're doing here on revenge, it really is a good fit, because there's a lot of the same behaviors, and now we know it's the behaviors look the same, and there's lots of research for that, but we also have now some neuroscience brain circuitry connection between the two behaviors that sort of establishes it on a biological level as well.
So when we look at addiction, we always look at like, all right, so the brain chemicals are a little screwy. We don't have good balance. We don't have that. And so what we need someone that has a substance abuse addiction is to get them away from their drug of choice for enough time that they can start thinking clearly. And when I start talking to someone, I personally don't want to deal with people in that recovering from place. You're always going to be recovering from something, but when you're recovering from something that has controlled your life, there are other better people to deal with that. For me, I want to talk to people that are starting to think clearly enough so they can have these ideas. Now, I can imagine that recovering from revenge is real hard to get somebody to experience without ever having to experience that, right? Like when you take a drug out of the circulation, it's just like, okay, all I have to do is not use. That's hard. But there is a physical kind of aspect to that you are in control of. Now, with revenge, you could want to get revenge everywhere and anywhere in your life. And I look at my life, and I look at, Jerry Springer and stuff like that, where it's like we idolized revenge. We looked at it as such a pleasurable thing. We idolized judging other people just from our couch, right? Like we were told judging people that's where it's at. We can do that. We're free at doing that. And so all of this is really tied together. How do you get somebody to distance themselves from revenge? How do you get somebody to emotionally sort of step back and say, "Whoa, okay, now how do you experience that?"
Yeah, so I think there's really some important things that you just said there. And one of them, and I think it's very powerful, is the concept of recovering to a place, right? Not recovering from revenge, but recovering to something. So at a logic level, okay, and let's just talk about pure logic, why revenge makes on its face, it seems like it makes perfect logical sense, but doesn't when you look more deeply. It's this way. It's an economic model of peace and happiness. All right. So you wake up, imagine you woke up this morning, right? Right before your eyes popped open, you have your full treasure in your wallet, or if you're a woman, in your purse, wherever. You have your full treasure of happiness for the day. It's right there. It's loaded up. I mean, I am flush with the cash of happiness and peace right now, right before I get out of bed or I let my mind start thinking about unpleasant thoughts, right? So I have my treasure of the day of happiness. So I get up out of bed and it's still there. It's all full and I'm good. And maybe I make it through the morning. I eat breakfast. I'm good. I jump in the car and now I start driving. And this driver who cuts me off, that person cuts me off. And it's as if they stole some or all of my happiness out of my wallet or my purse. I am now unhappy by their cutting me off. Mm-hmm. It makes sense if happiness were like money or gold or silver. It would make sense to hit the accelerator and chase after the person who cut you off to get your happiness back, right? Because you had it. I'm driving along. I'm happy as a clam. Somebody just cuts me off. I now experience instantaneous unhappiness. They must have it. They must have stolen it from me. So I'm going to go to them. So I accelerate to get my happiness back. But when you get, let's say, parallel with them and you're like looking over, right? They don't have it. They actually don't have your happiness. But you believe they do, and you logically think, oh, I get it back by making them unhappy. In other words, by stealing their happiness. Because the guy that just cut me off, that guy's happy about it. He's over there happy and thrilled that he just, almost ran me off the road, cut me off. So if I make him or her unhappy, I will replenish my treasure, my trove of happiness for the day. So I cut that person off in the belief that I've just replenished my supply. And for a moment, it is true, right? For a moment, that's what I was saying about with the addiction, you get this instantaneous burst of high. You get an instantaneous pleasure, because this is all happening in the pleasure center of your brain, right? Where narcotics are working. So you're feeling happy for a moment and you're like, oh, my happiness is back. But it's not actually at all. It was just a quick burst. Now the guy's coming around to run you off of the road again, or cut you off, and you're and once the high comes down, even if they're unable to get to you a second or a third time, you're starting to recognize, oh my God, my heart's racing. I just about killed myself. I might have killed the 3 people in the car with me, or put other people in harm's way. I'm like all freaked out. I'm angry and filled with rage. I thought I was supposed to feel happy again. I don't. We thought that we were able to get our happiness back by going and finding it from the person who stole it. We see that they don't have it. We decide to make them unhappy to replenish our store of happiness. Then we realize that's not working either. We're no longer happy at all. The flaw in that logic, it's a perfect logic argument if happiness is a commodity of finite supply like gold or silver or diamonds. It's not. The truth is happiness is available in infinite supply. It comes from within. And the only way to restore, replenish, and have more than you could ever possibly need or want or use in your entire life, and to become extremely rich beyond your wildest dreams with the wealth of happiness and peace, is forgiveness. That's the only way that you replenish it.
That's beautiful. And, that brings up to mind that, there's always this kind of give and take of everything. And it's like what you give up for forgiveness is that like little high that you get. But for every high, for every up, there is a down, right? Like for every high, there is a come down. And that come down, like like we talked about cutting off, people getting cut off and cutting you off and whatnot. You know, like I haven't experienced getting cut off in over a decade. And the only reason is because I don't see it anymore. It's like I may be getting cut off, but it all depends on how you define it. And it all depends on how you perceive it. It is all just made up. You know, even if somebody wants to come in close to me, before they do, I know they do. Now, when I know they do, I have a choice to make. I either speed up or I slow down. And I have learned over the last decade, slowing down when I know someone wants to get in just makes my life easier.
What a fantastic way of looking at it. It's deeply perceptive and really useful. It's useful. Like I said, I'm still yelling at the drivers who cut me off. So I really find that imagery to be really important, which is to say you're deciding whether to be aggrieved or not, right? That's the first step. Do you have a grievance? That's actually a choice, right? Many times, not always. There's a lot of things in the world. If you know, for instance, I've worked with our methodology that I will probably get into in a little bit, with a woman who was abducted and raped as a teenager and still carrying this with her. She experienced a real grievance, right? There's no dispute about that. And she's been carrying that, and it's been ruining her life ever since. How do I get past this grievance and this desire to retaliate against? It was really actually against a group of guys who did this. And so that's a real grievance. But a lot of times, as you just described, a lot of the things that we think are injustices or grievances are not at all. We've created a set of rule structures in our mind for how other people should behave, or what is or isn't proper conduct, and what is or isn't going to be offensive to me at this particular moment. And your strategy of just saying, I don't see getting cut off. I haven't been cut off in a decade because I don't experience it that way and don't see it anymore. That's you know, it's genius. I mean, it's a really great way of eliminating and making your whole drive peaceful every day.
Yeah, that sort of experience I have found, and it's at the core of everything that is Recover Yourself, because if you are constantly living under the influence of those things around you, you are not within you. You are subject to some, and anything could step in that role. Anything can step in there, and from social media, marketing, and then you can just be the victim of all those things. And one of the things is like not being the victim, and it's like you just win everything. It's just like all of a sudden there's nothing to win. There is no more competition.
Right. And so going back to your concept of recovering to something, and then thinking, you know, as you do it with substance use, but thinking about that in revenge is critical. So what could you recover to? You can recover to your peace and happiness. Your greatest treasure is what you're trying to recover when you make a decision to not retaliate against somebody who you perceive, rightly or wrongly, as having hurt you. You can recover to your peace and happiness only, actually, by undergoing a practice that we call, we have this concept called non-justice, which means to abstain from seeking justice in the form of revenge, even without forgiveness. It's the act, what you described. I really liked what you said about, you know, in terms of substance use recovery, one of the important early steps is to separate the person, right, from their drug of choice, so that for long enough for them to start their brain to kind of come back. And that's kind of a middle step, or it's a first initial, or I don't know where you would call it, but it's a step in the recovery to process, and a necessary step. Because if you can't stop them from taking or using, you have no chance of a recovery until that at least begins. Well, here's the analog to that in revenge is non-justice, which is to say, if you can at least for a moment stop retaliating, right? You won't be able to get your revenge craving under control and then replace it by recovering to your peace and happiness. And so non-justice is this middle step or initial step in the process towards forgiveness. And lots of people, when I talk about this, go, well, two things. One is, what does forgiveness really mean and what are we doing? And isn't that wrong to forgive people who have done terrible things? That's one question that I think we could explore and should. And then the other is, well, if I want to buy into this forgiveness thing and I believe that I'm getting really the wealth of the world, right, through restoring my peace and happiness, right? That's really what all of us want every day. The question that often people ask me is, well, how do you forgive somebody? Like, what does it mean, first of all? And secondly, how do you make it happen once you understand what it means? And I found that many people, for many, many, many people, the perception is that forgiveness is something you do for the person who hurt you, the person who wronged you, is a gift that you're giving, and that forgive, the give part of that word is the gift to this person and letting them off the hook. That's not at all what forgiveness means. It's not even what the root of the word forgiveness means. And it's not what we're trying to accomplish, is convincing people to forgive and do a nice or a kindness to somebody that just hurt them. Not at all. Forgiveness is what you're doing for yourself to heal and restore your peace and happiness. It's completely a self-centered, selfish act of self-healing. And I don't mean selfish in the negative way. I mean a self-salvation way of healing. And when I say salvation, I don't also mean, salvation in the religious sense of you need to be saved from sin and hell. What I mean, your hell is now. If you're not experiencing peace and happiness, your hell is today. Yeah. And there's a way out. And the way out is through forgiving the pain and the people that have caused it as your way of restoring your peace and happiness and freeing yourself from hell. And my tradition is Christian, but I've long since come to see that what Jesus was teaching and what his point wasn't about, come through me and, God will give you a deal when you die. His teaching was learn to forgive even somebody who tortures and kills you. When you can forgive in real time a person who's sticking nails in you and a sword, you've achieved maximal peace and happiness, because even that is no longer able to impact you and who you truly are. And it restores your identity, right, as a true godlike being, a son of God, whatever language that you use. But it shows that you're truly invulnerable and that you have taken complete mastery over this world and over your own brain, which is what we're really talking about.
That's right. And he had a grievance. Nobody would blame him. Nobody would blame him for being pissed off. No one would blame him for damning them. No one would blame him. And yet it's all for naught. Right.
And did he do so? The thought, it seems like, that we've been taught over the centuries is so he didn't damn them for our benefit. And I don't think that's the case. What I see is he didn't damn them for his own divine self. He saw in himself his own power to achieve a state of the divine, which is completely untouchable by all harm ever, and complete pure experience of love and light. And that you can only experience that maximal happiness, maximal peace, by forgiving all of the things of this world, not as a gesture of kindness to those things, as a gesture of your own freedom from those things. That's what you're doing with forgiveness. So it's important to define what is forgiveness, and then we can talk about, so how did he get there while being tortured? How can you get to that space? And can we do that? And the answer, I think he was trying to say, is you can do this and more than I do. No problem. Just know that that's the thing to do if you want to recover to your peace and happiness.
That's right. I look at this as evolutionary. right? Like where we, the more people that learn to do this, the more, through the ether we learn, through even watching. Like if you can see somebody get cut off and let it go, like if you can see that more often, then you can learn it. You can learn that, it's not necessary for me to get upset. But getting upset, being, like if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like we get to hear those things so often. So when you said he was doing it for his own divinity, he was doing it for himself. And we talked, briefly, you talked about selfishness. Selfishness is at the core of recovering yourself, but not in a way where it's like, oh, you are going to do things regardless of others. You are going to do things because there are others. You have to be selfish when there are others, because
right, your
so
divine
important.
highest self, right? It's yourself with a capital S. It's recognizing your divinity and being selfish to the divinity within you, as opposed to the little ego within you, which is this, the little fearful, craven idea of separateness. And you're finally starting to renounce that and go, that's not me. My ego really isn't me. At a certain point of maturity and evolution, as you said, comes a realization, but just happened for Jesus at a very early age. And to this extent, he was doing it for us. He was showing us how, right? How to do this. His example is amazing. It's miraculous, and it's powerful, and it's endured for thousands of years as the prime example of realization of yourself as the Son of God, right? The divine, a divine one, the divine one.
If you can give me a summary of the process of non-justice.
So let's talk about that. So the non-justice system that we created is a way of achieving and restoring your full peace and happiness and forgiveness, which is ultimately at the end of this, in a quick process in which you are able to put the person who wronged you on trial and experience convicting that person, sentencing them, punishing them even, and then experience at the end a deeper moment in which you see yourself on trial and you realize that seeking revenge against them didn't restore your peace and happiness, but there is a better, more powerful way. And the way this all works is it happens inside your mind. So in the non-justice system, as opposed to the real justice system, the courtroom is in your head. You play all the roles. You play the prosecutor, the victim, the defendant, the judge, the administrator of punishments, the prison warden, whatever, and ultimately the judge of your own life and your own freedom. You play all these roles rather quickly but powerfully. And the reason that it works is because, remember, when you've been wronged, if you're wronged at this moment, right, like right now while I'm speaking, 1 minute later, that's only existent in your memory and it will never be experienced in the world again. Nobody outside of you can experience it. You can't even experience it with your bodily senses. It's only inside your head. It's a memory. It's a thought formation. Likewise, your desire to retaliate only exists inside your head. Can't be found anywhere else in the world. Can't be experienced with the bodily senses or by anybody else. It only exists inside your head. So if the pain is only in your head, and if the desire to retaliate is only in your head, then it makes sense, doesn't it, that we ought to have a court system and a process that works inside your head to fix all that and to resolve it once and for all. You don't need a great, elaborate courthouse, and you don't need an expensive lawyer, an expensive judge, and all of this stuff to solve your problem. And as a matter of fact, most of those systems just victimize you over and over again. They take forever. They're very expensive. Very few people can access them. The justice system is a really old and not very effective way of resolving conflicts and restoring people's happiness. So the non-justice system that we've created and studied at Yale and shown is effective, it's been shown to have efficacy in reducing revenge cravings and increasing, oddly enough, benevolence toward the person who wronged you, which is also to say increasing your peace and happiness. So it teaches you and helps you not seek justice first in the form of revenge as a way of healing, and then ultimately forgiveness becomes a thing that you don't have to do or work toward. It just falls into it's like a gift from the gods. It falls out of the sky into your lap. Forgiveness just happened. You don't even know that you were looking for it. Mm-hmm. It finally is achieved, and you feel this great weight and burden lifted from your shoulders. So that's the non-justice system.
That's beautiful. And, it aligns really heavily with the work I do when I work with people one-on-one. So much of the work that I do is about just like they go through and they don't really recognize what's happening. And then like their diets have changed, their habits have changed. All of these things have changed. And they're like, well, I didn't do anything to make those change. And it's like, no. Doing is not what you're trying that's not how you live your life. You live your life by being. And in order to be, you have to you have to be okay with other people being and doing what they're going to be and do.
Right. Well, I like the idea of, can you be in forgiveness? Can you be forgiving? Which is another way of saying, can you be happy and peaceful? Do you choose it? If you choose happiness and peace, you've already chosen forgiveness. There's nothing you need to do at all other than choose peace and happiness. That the door through which peace and happiness is achieved or arrived upon or arrived at is the door of forgiveness, and it comes quite naturally. It's not something that you have to actively engage in or do and go, oh, I forgive so-and-so. Mm-hmm. It's more about putting aside, and the definition of forgiveness is to choose to no longer seek revenge against somebody who wronged you, to no longer feel resentment toward that person. It's just that choice is all that forgiveness is, and yet it's as powerful as your freedom from the past.
Oh, James, thank you so much. What a great conversation.
Thank you as well.
Absolutely. The more we unravel what it means to recover something, the more we find that doing is not at the root of achieving or arriving at that which we are targeting. As James mentioned, forgiveness is a natural process that presents itself through awareness and curiosity. It's not something we have to actively do or engage in. There is also nothing that we require from anyone else in order to successfully accomplish forgiveness. So keep that in mind next time you find yourself looking for revenge. There are links to James's books, research studies, websites, and his Twitter account in the description of this episode. I encourage you to check out all that James is doing, because if you're interested in recovering yourself, the work he is doing is very much in line with all that we're talking about here. Please rate and review this podcast and or leave comments for this episode to help me better create helpful content. Support this show at anchor.fm or support me and my work at Patreon, where you will get access to unedited content as well as writings and access to supporter group portrait sessions with me. I host workshops regularly, which are both open to the public and are a source of continuing education units for professionals. I take a limited number of one-on-one clients every month, so contact me through MartinJon.com when you're ready to work together. I also accept financial support through Venmo at MartinJon_Garcia. So if you benefit from listening to this content, please consider supporting my efforts. Thank you for listening to the Recover Yourself podcast. And until next time, keep recovering yourself.